this morning is by Rabbi Jeffrey Wolberg, from which the gathering words were taken. He's an Orthodox rabbi. It's from his Christmas sermon in 2004. But you'll find echoes of his concerns this year as well, notably in the outrage over the simple, pristine red of Starbucks holiday cups. No mention of Christmas, an attack on religion and outrage. 10 years ago, Rabbi Wolberg said, "The truth of the matter is that while Hanukkah and Christmas are two very different holidays, this year they both had something in common. Some people tried to take them away from us." This attempt was made manifest in different ways. Federated department store owners of Macy's told their managers to avoid displaying Merry Christmas banners. Only season's greetings was deemed appropriate. New York City's Mayor Bloomberg said that the tree he lit outside of the City Hall was not a Christmas tree, but a holiday tree. And the founder of the company producing Crispicut cards for interfaith couples who wish to send greetings to both holidays said that, quote, "Our intention wasn't to merge the religious aspects, but rather the secular aspects of the holidays." But that's the whole problem. Hanukkah is not a secular holiday, and neither is Christmas. Hanukkah is a holiday that celebrates a victory for religious liberty and freedom. Had the Maccabees lost the battle, there would be no Judaism today. Indeed, there would be no Christianity. In fact, until the 5th century, there was a day in the church calendar commemorating the Maccabees. Even more, it's very possible that Christians were more familiar with the story than Jews were. The book of Maccabees, after all, was included in the Christian Bible and the Apocrypha, but not in the Jewish one. The events and personalities of the Hanukkah story were used by Christians as archetypes of Christian ideals. Jewish martyrs ready to give up their lives for their faith served as an inspiration for Christians facing persecution at the hands of the Romans. Everyone understood that there was nothing secular about the Maccabees' victory, and that it shouldn't certainly be celebrated in a secular way. If it is, its whole message is lost. Similarly, Christmas deserves to be celebrated by Christians for what it is, a religious holiday, not a secular one. I know many Jews psychologically bar their doors when someone comes on TV and says, "This is a Christian country." A statement like that bothers me as well, but sometimes we go overboard. The fact of the matter is, America is not a Christian country, but an overwhelming majority of Americans are Christians. Why shouldn't Christmas be celebrated across our country? But I say it shouldn't be celebrated because it's a secular holiday. To me, that robs Christians of one of their most sacred days. It should be celebrated in America because 75% of Americans are Christians, and the other 25% aren't being forced to observe it. You want to get up early on December 25th and go to church, go to work. Nobody's stopping you, nor is anyone forcing you to bring a Christmas tree into your house. Dealing with issues of church and state is a central issue of our time. Most every country is now confronting it. But whereas in Islamic countries the effort from the very beginning was to impose religion, and whereas in European countries, especially after the French Revolution, the effort was made to free people from religion, America was created to free people to practice their religion. And freedom to practice requires not secularizing our religions and not blurring the difference between religions, but learning to respect each other's religious beliefs. The enemies of Judaism and Christianity are no longer each other. We both share common enemies: atheism, materialism, warfare, poverty, bigotry, and ignorance, and, tragically, to some degree, Islam. And the goals and messianic dreams of Judaism and Christianity are shared in common as well: justice, brotherhood, love, and peace. So let's put the back into Hanukkah. And yes, let Christians put Christ back into Christmas. Let's not attempt to secularize our religions or to blur our religious differences. Let us learn to respect each other's religions. Then there will truly be peace on earth and goodwill toward all men and women as well. II, after the Nazis had bombed and burned the Warsaw Ghetto, a boy and a girl were hiding in the ruins. David, 14-year-old, and Rebecca, 13. It was winter and bitter cold outside. Every few days, David would go out in search of food. All the stores had been destroyed in the bombing, and David sometimes found stale bread, cans of food, or whatever else had been buried. One night, David finally returned from his foraging with a feast and a surprise. And when they finished the feast, Rebecca said, "What's the surprise?" "Rebecca," David said, "today is the first day of Hanukkah, and I found a candle and some matches." "Hanukkah tonight?" "Yes." "Oh, how wonderful." David lit a match, lighted the candle, and pronounced the benediction, which Reverend Rachel shared with us, over the Hanukkah candle. And Rebecca said, "Amen." They both lost their families, and they had good reason to be angry with God for sending them so many afflictions. But the light of the candle brought peace into their souls. The glimmer of that light, surrounded by so many shadows, seemed to say, without words, evil has not yet taken complete dominion. A spark of hope is still left. For some time, David and Rebecca had thought about escaping from Warsaw to link up with the partisans in the forests. And now, by the light of the Hanukkah candle, they suddenly felt renewed courage. David had found an opening in a sewer, which he thought might lead to the other side of the wall, and they were soon on their way through the ruins. They came to passages so narrow they had to crawl on the hands and knees, but the food they had eaten and the joy that the Hanukkah candle had awakened in them gave them the courage to continue. Many miracles seemed to happen that Hanukkah night. There was a complete blackout, and the bitter cold meant that there were fewer Gestapo guards. David and Rebecca managed to leave the sewer and steal out of the city without being caught. And then after a week, they found the partisans. It was the last day of Hanukkah, and that evening, the partisans lit 8 candles. Some of them played dreidel on the stump of an oak tree, while others kept watch. From the day David and Rebecca met the partisans, their life became like a tale in a storybook. They joined more and more refugees who all had but one desire: to settle in the land of Israel. The Jews of Israel greeted them with a love that made them forget their suffering. They were the first refugees to reach the Holy Land. They were offered all the help and comfort that could be given. They found relatives in Israel who accepted them with open arms, and though they had become quite emaciated, they were basically healthy and recovered quickly. After some rest, they went to a special school to learn modern Hebrew for those who had never spoken it before. And when Rebecca was 18, she and David were married. Singer says, "I know all this because David and Rebecca told me their story one Hanukkah evening. David and I were playing dreidel with their little son. David told me that this large wooden dreidel was the same one the partisans had played with on that Hanukkah evening in the forest in Poland. Rebecca said to me, if it had not been for that little candle David brought to our hiding place, we wouldn't be sitting here today. That glimmer of light awakened in us a hope and a strength we didn't know we possessed. We'll give the dreidel to our son when he's old enough to understand what we went through and how miraculously we were saved." Singer's story is an example of a miracle of Hanukkah. The story of how the holiday came to be is a little more ambiguous, though. Michael Strasfield, in his book, The Jewish Holidays, concludes his summary of Hanukkah this way. Hanukkah is the most historically documented of all Jewish holidays. We have early sources for it in the first and second book of the Maccabees and in the works of Josephus, the Jewish historian. We have later accounts in the Talmud and other rabbinic literature. There was even a medieval book called the Scroll of Antiochus, which is modeled after the biblical book of Esther. The problem we face is that in none of these accounts do we find the story of the menorah that burned for 8 days, as it's popularly known. So, that miraculous oil that stayed alight for 8 days when it should have gone out after 1 doesn't appear in stories for some 300 years. It seems odd that so central a part of this holiday should be documented so late in the development of the tradition, especially given the events behind the original establishment of the holiday, which are better documented than any other Jewish celebration. There are several reasons why it took so long for the holiday to be officially established by the religious authorities. It had been practiced in folk traditions by ordinary people for generations. But the rabbis were concerned. While the battle waged by a small number of Jews loyal to their tradition more than 160 years before the birth of Jesus resulted in the liberation of the nation and certainly saved the traditional heart of their religious practices, circumcision, temple sacrifices, kosher laws, the teaching of the Torah, and so on, it did not result in a political system that was admirable or long-standing. And it encouraged martyrdom in the defense of religion, fomented doomed uprisings, and even caused the slaughter of Jews who had become secular. There was also the uncomfortable fact that much of the motive for abandoning traditional Jewish practices had come from Jewish leaders who themselves were embarrassed by what seemed to them to be primitive superstitions that they were happy to leave behind to participate in the more modern Greek way of life. And unfortunately, the leaders who defeated the Greeks were themselves corrupt and tyrannical, only to be followed by still greater oppression of the Jews when the Romans took over. And then some 30 years after Jesus was crucified, around 66 of the Common Era, a revolt against the Romans led by fanatics who had been inspired by the Maccabees resulted in a still greater catastrophe, the destruction of Jerusalem and of the temple itself, along with the expulsion of Jewish religious leadership from Jerusalem. Christianity, founded among Jews and by Jews, began to define itself as an independent religion in opposition to Judaism and its traditional practices, and even denounced the Jews to the Romans. Finally, there was one more rebellion against the Romans in 132 of the Common Era, led by Bar Kokhba, who had been endorsed by some of the rabbis as their Messiah. This resulted in yet another military rout at a cost of more than 500,000 lives, followed by the expulsion of all Jews from Jerusalem. And it was in the wake of this seemingly unending series of catastrophes for the Jewish people that the rabbis sat down to answer the question, what is Hanukkah? Here's a contemporary reflection on that question from the New Jersey Jewish News. What is Hanukkah? The rabbis were asking this question in the Talmud, aware that the story of the Maccabees and the miracle of the oil were subject to many interpretations. Is it a holiday about religious freedom? After all, Hanukkah's villains were those who would suppress religious freedom, and its heroes are those who fight for it. Is it a holiday about resisting assimilation? Like many of the people conquered by the Hellenists, the Jews were surely tempted to adopt the conqueror's ways, and certainly many did. Is it a holiday about Zionism? For centuries, the story of the Maccabees inspired Jews in their dreams of Israel. Is it a holiday about hope? We light the menorah during the darkest time of the year, when dark days might lead to dark thoughts. But the number of candles increases each day, increasing the light and symbolizing our hope that things will get better. In fact, the article concludes, Hanukkah is a holiday about all these things, even when the lessons seem contradictory. We come to our celebrations both as individuals and as members of a people. We find our own meanings in our rituals, but we find them together. It's that happy paradox of Happy Hanukkah. As Unitarian Universalists, we have tended to prefer the interpretation that understands the holiday as a celebration of religious freedom and toleration. We admire the plucky few who defeated a mighty army to practice their religion in the manner they have been taught. The problem with this viewpoint is that the victors in that battle were in fact not interested at all in religious toleration. They opposed efforts to change the practice of Judaism by other Jews, and they were willing to slaughter Jews who disagreed with them. For us, this is a little reminiscent of the Puritans who founded our first, second, and third, and fourth parishes in these parts. They fled to Massachusetts so that they could freely practice their religion as they chose, and then they resolutely refused to allow anyone else to freely practice their religion as they chose, thus driving Anne Hutchinson, Roger Williams, and many others out of this colony as heretics. So if we were to transport ourselves back in time, our own sympathies would probably be on the side of the so-called Hellenizers, those Jews who were attempting to modernize their religion and make it compatible with the more universal religion of the Greeks. This struggle highlights a potential weaknesses of our own universalism when we lose track of the particulars of our religious traditions and begin to wish that everyone would just adopt our wiser and more modern willingness to see that there is so much in common across all religions, and to lose track of the particulars which give each religion its unique strength. Rabbi Irving Greenberg offers this critique of universalism in the context of Hanukkah. One theme of Hanukkah is the clash of the universal with the particular. Hellenism saw itself as the universal human culture, after all. The conflict of the Maccabees preserved the stubborn Jewish insistence on doing our own thing religiously. Never mind the claims of universalism that only if all are citizens of one world and one faith will there truly be one humanity. By not disappearing, Jews have continued to force the world, down to this day, to accept the limits of centralization. Jewish existence has been a continued stumbling block to whatever political philosophy, religion, or economic system that has claimed the right to abolish all distinctions for the higher good of humanity. The Maccabean Revolution made clear that a universalism that denies the rights of the particular to exist is inherently totalitarian and will end up oppressing people in the name of one humanity. Universalism must surrender its overweening demands and accept the universalism of pluralism. Only when the world admits that oneness comes out of particular existences linked through overarching unities will it escape the inner dynamics of conformity that lead to repression and cruelty. I like that term, universalism of pluralism. Our own universalism grew out of the belief that every person, everyone in the whole universe would ultimately be saved. In the context of their time, it meant that everyone would ultimately go to heaven. For me today, this means that we are not in a position to judge the particulars of each person's religious beliefs and practices, but that our task is to acknowledge the particulars as they are, while still finding common cause and common purpose in the shared humanity that unites us all. That despite differences and disagreements, every person must be treated as having inherent worth and dignity, as our first principle puts it. As the whole world becomes more tightly knit as a result of communication, transportation, trade, Hanukkah is a good reminder to honor the differences, to tolerate the pluralism, to insist on maintaining the particulars, including our own. And today it's the pluralism represented by American Muslims that's suspect. Karen mentioned an incident of an insult. Since the attack on the World Trade Center, and more intensely since the heavily armed massacre in San Bernardino last Wednesday, Muslims in general have been regarded by many with unwarranted suspicion that's led to threats, vandalism, and violence. Several presidential candidates have singled them out for special treatment as aliens in America. There are suggestions that all Muslims should be registered, that some mosques should be closed down, and that a Muslim should not be eligible to become president of the United States. And of course, there's long been a spurious claim that our president is a secret Muslim. A CNN ORC poll in this September, found that 43% of Republicans and 29% of Americans held this opinion. And 20% of Americans continue to believe that Barack Obama was born outside the United States, despite the fact that our president produced his own birth certificate showing he was born in Hawaii. And given these un-American attacks on our Muslim brothers and sisters, we as Unitarian Universalists need to take steps to stand side by side with them and support their right to religious freedom and tolerance as much as any other community of faith. Signing a card this morning is one step in that direction. Our long history of support for freedom, reason, and tolerance demands no less of us as we take our rightful place as proponents of the universalism of pluralism. In the end, Hanukkah was too popular for the rabbis to ignore, even though they were troubled by some of the unfortunate results of the struggle of the Maccabees to free their people from the Greeks. It had become an important part of the religious life of the ordinary folks, and so they found a miracle after all, the miracle of the oil. It lasted 8 days instead of only 1. And that miracle, in turn, marked Hanukkah as one of the almost universal festivals of light that fall right around this time of the year. A celebration of the reality that on the shortest days of the year, when the light is more and more fleeting, there's still hope for the return of the sun. That hope has kept many alive in the depths of despair, and that hope is shared with Christianity's festival of lights, Christmas. It's therefore appropriate that the Christmas star should help to intensify the light of the menorah, while the menorah does the same for the Christmas star. May we share the hope of this season of light and spread the love that makes hope possible. Thus may we all join in the joy of this season. May it be so, and amen.